we have a lot of experienced volunteer managers that are in the room. So coming into this, they'd asked us to present about volunteer management. So we did a high level of what we at 1OC consider the 6 basic functions of volunteer management. So we can walk through those a little bit. We'll probably go through those pretty quickly because it sounds like you all are pretty much aware of those pieces. And we'll try to spend a little bit more time in the second part of our presentation, which is talking about trends in volunteerism, ways you can sort of, take advantage of those emerging trends, and also talking about skills-based volunteers, which I think could be really a great strategic piece for many of the challenges that everyone's talking about today. So we'll have Alyssa run through quickly just the core functions, and then we'll spend some more time in that area, okay? All right.
Okay, so as Caitlin said, it seems like you're all pretty familiar, so you might know this basic definition of volunteer management. But it is the systematic and logical process of working with and through volunteers to achieve all of your organization's objectives and your mission. You might hear this referred to as volunteer engagement, coordination, and administration as well. So this concept is really just to get you thinking a little bit differently about volunteer management. So it's common for us as nonprofit organizations to position volunteers as an output of the organization versus them being an input or a means to accomplishing some organizational end. So just to get you thinking a little bit differently about how we're leveraging volunteers.
I'm having a hard time hearing you. And would you repeat that, please?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Okay.
Got it.
Yeah, I think it's because I'm also facing the screen. So, it is common for us as nonprofit organizations to look at volunteers as an input or as an output versus an input. So, we should be thinking of them as a means to accomplishing some organizational end versus they're just here for one day to help us with an event. Right? So, just thinking about how we're leveraging volunteers a little bit differently.
A lot of what we say and what we communicate to volunteers themselves and to our stakeholders, it's really important the words that we're using because that subconsciously kind of sets expectations for volunteers. And I think whenever we start as nonprofits tracking volunteers as sort of they are the outputs, oh, we want to reach 300 volunteers, oh, we need to increase that level to 400 volunteers. We're managing a volunteer program then instead of managing to our mission. Right? So instead of our goal being X number of volunteers and that being the output, we need to say, what are our volunteers going to accomplish? And that's our output. How much more of our mission did we deliver because of volunteers, resources, different things we're putting into it? So it's just shifting your thoughts a little bit about volunteers being an input versus an output and making sure we're managing that way with those expectations.
Just thinking them, as important as all of our finance and HR departments and everyone else that works with us at our organizations, volunteers are equally as important. As you all mentioned, you cannot do what you do on a daily basis without them. Okay, so again, we have decided that these are kind of the core functions of volunteer management. So we would begin by planning. And so that might look like doing assessments of what your organization is currently doing with volunteers, how they can utilize volunteers, just really planning out what you need as an organization. And then you would go into recruitment, which it sounds like that's where a lot of us are having trouble, is just recruiting our volunteers and getting them to stay. And so we'll go through some recruitment tools in a little bit, but as well as supporting our volunteers. So we have considered that to be through onboarding, orientations, and training, and all of those should be ongoing support throughout their entire time as volunteers with you. And we can send you all the slides as well after this, so you have
I'm having a hard time even reading. What is it? Retain and recognize?
Yes, and then retain and recognize. So I think this is a key piece in just making sure our volunteers want to come back, right? So maybe while it might be a good idea not to give them the volunteer position description because we want them to move trash cans, that may not be a great way to get them to come back, right? So really focusing on how we can also retain our volunteers and recognize them for all the work that they're doing to help us. And then the last piece of this is evaluation. So after your volunteers leave, are you giving them that assessment where they let you know how they felt volunteering for you, maybe where areas of improvement are, and how you can really learn from your volunteers as well. Okay. So the first piece of this, like I mentioned, is planning. So that looks like conducting a volunteer needs assessment. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with that piece in this process, but it looks like creating organizational goals around volunteers. What are some unmet needs you might have in your organization? And can we get stakeholder buy-in? Who are we talking to about this? How can we leverage our volunteers? By talking to our stakeholders, talking to our board members. And then it also looks like making sure you identify resources for your volunteer program. So oftentimes we go into this and we just say, oh, we're going to have all these volunteers, and then we don't have a budget to provide them with t-shirts or food or coffee if they're volunteering early in the morning. So take an inventory of your staff, your budget, any collateral pieces, any marketing, and then what's available for recruiting and supporting and recognizing your volunteers. So those are all really important pieces in thinking about what your volunteer program is going to look like. All right. So this is what we've identified as the 4 steps of recruitment. So that begins with developing a volunteer position description. So it sounds like some of you mentioned those, so you're familiar with what that looks like. But really we want to make sure the volunteers know what they are signing up for, what they're coming to do on that day, providing them with that. It's really going to get their interest in the first place. So making sure you have a solid volunteer position description to post, on different sites and platforms and really gain an interest. Next, you're going to want to develop a targeted recruitment plan. So where are we posting this? Who are we looking for? It sounds like a lot of you are looking for certain age demographics. So where can we find those people, meet them where they're at by developing that recruitment plan? So maybe it is, okay, we might need someone to figure out social media because that's where, college students are. Or are we looking at college clubs because we know that they need to volunteer? Really thinking about how you're doing that targeted outreach. And then 3 looks like screening volunteers. We believe that screening volunteers is just a good practice, so that might look like, a volunteer interview before you match them to appropriate positions, and it just, to get them feel like they're committing to something, you can kind of sense their commitment by screening them, right? Are they coming back, or are they jumping through, those hoops? We don't want to make it too complicated for them, but it's just to gain some information from them. And then lastly is interviewing and matching volunteers to appropriate positions. So this is just important because we want to make sure we're actually listening to our volunteers and utilizing their skills appropriately, because that's going to keep them, right? That's going to make them come back. Okay, so supporting. I'll go into each of these 3 pieces, but often you hear these interchangeably. So you may only have onboarding, you might only have orientation or training, but really all 3 of these pieces are considered core functions and needed in order to support every volunteer. So onboarding looks like giving the volunteers an overview of their role. That might include volunteer handbook, volunteer waivers in case you're outside, you're lifting things or anything, making sure that you're onboarding them and orienting them to the process, and kind of what the organization might look like. What's the culture that they're walking into? Who do they talk to, when they need something? Is there a coffee room? And just making sure they feel comfortable where they're volunteering at. And then orientation. So this is connecting volunteers to your mission, your vision, your organizational culture, which is likely what brought them to you in the first place. So making sure you're orienting them to what your organization goal is and how they can help you further that mission. And then training. So obviously we want our volunteers to have the skills that we need for them to perform the role and the functions that you all need to fill those gaps. So making sure you're training them properly with each role that they're taking on.
So you can think of this as onboarding is very specific to them and their role, so you want to make them comfortable that way. Orientation is very much more specific to your organization. Do they feel comfortable in their surroundings? Do they understand what your organization is doing? And then training is really something that should be ongoing. So you might think of that as only something that happens when they show up on the first day or right when they start. But hopefully you're elevating your volunteer as they go throughout it. If there are changes that happen in your organization, and nonprofits, there's always changes, different priorities, different ways we're doing things. You want to keep your volunteers up to date on that. It's a way to engage them and retain them is to provide ongoing training and update them much in the same way you would a staff person. So you want to start thinking about, even if there's not necessarily something new they need to learn at that time, it is a really great retention method to provide some pieces of training throughout their volunteer journey. Right.
And then retention, this is the big piece, right? Now we have volunteers, how do we get them to come back and how do we get them to stay with us beyond that one day or that one event, right? So again, we want to make sure we establish those volunteer goals and responsibilities. So we know, I'm sure everybody can raise their hand of a volunteer experience they've had where they've gone in and they've been like, okay, no one's here to tell me what I'm doing for the day, I'm just kind of running around, right? And I don't know what to do. This doesn't feel like they need me. I don't feel needed, I don't feel like I have a purpose here, right? So I'm really making sure that your volunteers understand the goal of the day, what their goal is as an individual, and their responsibilities for their time with you. And it's important to have regular check-ins scheduled. So, with a lot of volunteers that we have at 1FC that we use internally, like we kind of do, maybe that looks like monthly for a lot of people. We are short on probably staff time, so that might look like even just monthly check-ins. Like, how are things going? And as you're talking with them, you're then learning, oh, well, it sounds like you kind of really enjoyed this one task. I would love if we could, move you into that position and really utilize and hone in on those skills as well. So it's really important just to have those regular check-ins to explore and understand their interests and skills, because they want to grow with you as well, just as much as you want them to grow with your organization, right? So it's just really important that you're doing those check-ins and understanding and listening to them. So again, listening to that volunteer feedback. So I don't know, show of hands, does anybody have an opportunity for volunteers to provide feedback right now in your organization? Yes? That's awesome. So not very many people raise their hand, right? So just making sure that there's feedback around that. So that could look as simple as maybe it's a Google form that they just fill out and check in with a few questions, right? So just making sure you're listening and providing them opportunities for that. And also, again, giving the opportunities for growth and ongoing training, like we mentioned. Maybe as you're looking at those younger college students, maybe trying to get them in, that might look like, oh, you're in a communications class, can you share some of those skills with us? We're looking to build our Instagram stories or LinkedIn or whatever that looks like. And now you're kind of honing in on those skills and allowing them to grow. So finding those new opportunities and providing that training throughout their time with you. And we want to include volunteers as much as possible to foster a sense of community among the organization as well. So something we do at 1FC is like we provide, a workspace, and we have their name on it, on a nameplate at the workspace, that they know they're really a part of our organization as well. They get name tags when they start with us, a welcome email to all staff. So we really try to make them feel as included and part of the organization as well. And this could look like, even if you include them in staff meetings or whatever that looks like, internal meetings, external meetings. So just making them feel part of the organization. And then you want to share their impact and connect what they're doing to the mission of your organization as often as possible. So again, if that's giving them a shout out via email, that's something we highly encourage. Like, look what our volunteers accomplished this weekend at this event. They were able to mobilize 150 other volunteers, or they were able to accomplish this arts event and 400 community members showed up. So really just giving them a shout out, and we really encourage that, whether that's via email to staff or posting on your social media.
And I think that if you want them to move trash cans, I think it's connecting to your mission. Why does this matter? They might say, this smells, and I don't know why I came here to volunteer, and this is what they have me doing. giving that explanation somehow, even if it's a little bit of a reach, how does that help your mission? Why do those trash cans need to be moved in order for you to have your event, in order for the cleanup to go well, in order for patrons who are coming then to have the best experience they can? That helps your mission. So I think it's just being able to connect that, especially in maybe those not so attractive roles that you all have. Yeah.
Environmental responsibility.
Yes.
Right.
There you go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You're on environmental duty.
Being able to come back.
Yes. Yeah. All right.
All right. And then recognizing. It's really important to have a recognition plan. That could be as simple as having a calendar dedicated to your volunteers where once a month you're doing something to recognize them. So we have just some ideas and simple ways that you can show that you're grateful for their help. So whether that's a verbal or written thank you, I think that's very common. At the end of the day, we all say thank you for your hard work, and so that's just one great way to recognize them. Making sure you're providing recognition at those events that you're having. So whether that's someone who is introing the art walk or the event of the day, and they're up at the mic and they're just saying, we couldn't have done this event without our 40 gracious volunteers here at the front, all wearing their volunteer t-shirts. So just really, again, doing them those shout outs. And spotlight posts on social media are a great way. That could look like get to know our volunteers and you're posting a picture with all of them, or even if you do volunteer spotlight where they get to write a little bio or something like that. Everybody wants to feel appreciated and seen, and so I think that's one great way to do that. Again, sharing the results of your volunteers' work. How are they impacting your organization, and how can we share that with as many people as possible to let them know that we're grateful for them. Celebrating birthdays and anniversaries. Again, this is something 1OC has been really great about since I've been there. At all of our staff meetings, we share out our birthdays for the month and anniversaries for the month. So how long has that volunteer been with you? Even if it's been 10 years and you're like, oh, we're retaining them, they're going to be here for another 10. It's just so great to make them feel appreciated. Maybe that's taking them out to lunch or whatever that is, celebrating those anniversaries and those birthdays. There is a National Volunteer Week, so celebrating that and making, again, maybe that's one day you have a catered breakfast or a lunch or whatever that looks like, just celebrating them throughout the week in small ways. Small tokens of appreciation, so that could look like, a $5 Starbucks gift card, anything just small to show them that you appreciate them. Organization swags, we all talk about how everybody loves a t-shirt, but thinking about environmental sustainability, maybe it's a water bottle, maybe it's a hat if you're out in the sun a lot, if you're surfing, I don't know, maybe something to clean their surfboards, I don't know what that looks like, but small tokens of appreciation and swag for your organization are great ways to get them connected and stay connected to your mission as well. They'll be proud to be wearing that hat or tote bag or t-shirt. And then awards and certificates. So one big event that we just had at 1OC, maybe you're familiar, is our Spirit of Volunteerism event. So it happens every year, and this is kind of our big recognition event where nonprofits and companies can honor their volunteers, and they get to say, I want to recognize and nominate these 10 volunteers or however many volunteers they have, and they all get an individual recognition at an event, a certificate, and a little award, and a catered lunch. It's a very nice event, and any nonprofit can do that and join us on that day. So it's a really great, just like a hug for volunteers to be awarded, get a certificate. You can also do that from your own organization as well, just providing them with a certificate if they completed a training with you or they made it through a few tough events. They're just good ways to honor and recognize your volunteers.
One of the biggest pieces when you look at recognition, I think we can all sit here and say that sounds so nice, absolutely, volunteers deserve that. One of the biggest things is if you sit down with a calendar and you say, okay, this month we're going to do one of these things, and the next month we're going to pick another thing that we're going to do. You need to assign someone who is in charge of that, who is actually executing that. So I think, again,
Can you repeat that?
yes. Yeah, so if you assign different things, you maybe try one of these a month and you maybe calendar that out so you're actually doing volunteer recognition. You need to make sure you're assigning someone to be in charge of that, who owns that piece. And so If you're maybe just starting this recognition plan, maybe it's one staff member per month is in charge of that recognition activity that is happening. But I think the biggest fault we see here, the reason maybe some of these things don't happen, is because we don't actually assign someone ownership of it. Or maybe we assign it all to one person, and guess what? We all have a lot to do. So doing something once a week or once a month might be too much for one staff person when we're all trying to juggle a lot of things. So make sure we're assigning ownership, but make sure it's a realistic level of what we can actually do. Otherwise, we end up doing nothing. So, all right.
All right, and that last piece is evaluation. So I think sometimes organizations tend to put this to the wayside, oftentimes of, getting qualitative and quantitative results, asking questions that align with our organizational goals. You want to be concise and easy to understand in these evaluations, assess the effectiveness of your volunteer program, but also the volunteer experience. So again, it kind of goes hand in hand with asking those volunteers and making sure they feel comfortable giving feedback as well. But you want to have all this information so that you can share your results with your stakeholders, or your board members, to really get buy-in to continue building out this volunteer program. So that evaluation piece is really important in terms of being able to then assess your program and what we can do differently or better to make sure we're retaining our volunteers and growing those programs. So really important that these assessments kind of gather all that data. And it's just important to think about who we're sharing that with and looking at, okay, it's great that our volunteer team knows this, right? Our volunteer staff knows all these answers, but then who are we sharing this with? Our board, our stakeholders, and how we can really continue that buy-in and grow that program.
Once again, here, one of the biggest maybe missteps or things that can make the evaluation process more difficult than it needs to be is you want to make sure you're evaluating things that you actually need to evaluate. So it might sound nice to say, how did you like breakfast? How did you like lunch? Did you feel comfortable with this? Did you enjoy meeting your supervisor? And ask all those questions, but really, what do you need to evaluate? So you probably have some things you need to evaluate from funders, from different, stakeholders that have said we need to know X, Y, and Z. But I think keeping the evaluation as short and concise as you can, with really being thoughtful about the questions you're asking, not over-evaluating. That gives you a lot of data that you really don't have anything to do with. And then it's also a longer survey or a longer process for the volunteer. We want to make it concise, easy, and to get their feedback on what you really need to hear. All right, in the interest of time, just checking the clock, I think we might skip ahead to our skills-based section and talk a little bit about that here. So we can kind of run through this quickly. Hands-on volunteering, we want to first differentiate between hands-on and skills-based volunteering. First, is anyone in this room using skills-based volunteers?
Can you define that a little bit?
Yeah. Okay, great question.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, so hands-on volunteers are those that are helping with our day of things. If we are a food bank, they're the people who are coming in, they're learning in 5 or 10 minutes how to pack a food box, and that's fantastic. We need volunteers like that for our organizations to function. But we want to also look at what is one of the biggest emerging trends, which is skills-based volunteers. And those are people who are using their professional expertise and skills to help you sort of extend your budget, extend your mission. So those people might be really being embedded in your organization in some way for usually a project basis, right? They're probably not the people that are ongoing. They're going to come regularly every month for 5 or 10 years. But they might be people who are committed to your organization for 1 or 2 months with a very specific project goal in mind. It might be a CPA that's willing to help you prepare for your audit. It might be, a HR person who's willing to help you rewrite your employee handbook or update your policies for something like that. So it's professionals who are coming into your organization and really delivering a specific skill. So The reason why that skills-based volunteering and figuring out how it works within your organization is important is because of these trends that we're picking up. So the trends of people expecting to be able to volunteer through their workplace. Especially here in Orange County, we have a lot of wonderful companies who have volunteer engagement employee engagement, employee volunteering programs, to the point where you can even get donations to your organization based on the number of hours a volunteer from a company is working with you, right? They match their volunteer hours with donations to your organization.
I don't understand. Could you explain that better, please?
Sure. So for instance, Experian. If you have a skills-based volunteer from their organization working with you, their employee matching program is set up. So if that employee works with us for 5 hours one week, we get $100 in donations from them. They match their employees' volunteer hours because they care that much about their employees being involved in the community.
How do you find out about those companies?
You can work with us. We know a lot of companies, as we said. We have 125 companies that we work with annually. We really get to know the different employee programs. And that's why it's also so important for you all to be creating skills-based volunteer positions. It brings other resources. If you have people donating their professional expertise, that means they're working with a company. They have that professional expertise, and now you're connected to that company. Ask your volunteers about that. At your place of work, do they have employee matching programs? Do they have any of these things? Do you get PTO days for volunteering? A lot of companies have that now.
What is it?
Time off.
Time off, like
Okay.
PTO for volunteer hours specifically. So those are also, when you're creating your targeted recruitment plans, think about that too. Are we targeting professional organizations in that? Knowing that a lot of companies now, again, have all of these things set up for their employees. We also see the rise of CSR and ESG. So that's corporate social responsibility and environmental, sustainable, and government. So it's, again, those companies wanting to get their employees involved in the community. And they have goals around it. They have whole dedicated departments to it at this point. How do we leverage that to help our nonprofits? They want to give resources back to the community. And then virtual volunteering. So of course, COVID, everyone does things virtually now. Because of all these things, we see skills-based volunteers as really the future of volunteering. The rates of hands-on volunteers have declined really on a trend since about 2008, but skills-based volunteering is increasing rapidly. So whenever you're looking at the needs in your organization, when you're saying you need more volunteers, I really encourage you to dig deep and think about, is this something that could be project-based? Is this something that professional expertise could help us accomplish? Because I really think that at this point, getting a skills-based volunteer is almost getting easier than a hands-on volunteer.
I would say
People, it's beneficial for the volunteer. They get professional development. If they're perhaps, thinking about any profession, if they are, let me think about how we use it. If they're a consultant, let's say they're a junior consultant at their company, but they have all these skills. They've gone through many, many years of college and university and everything, and they're working on strategic plans. They might not get to lead a strategic plan development at their place of work. They may need to work a couple years in order to do that. But guess what? They could come in and help your organization and lead that process. That's professional development for them as well, so you can position it as a win-win for everybody. So think about things like that. Again, some benefits here. When you're using skills-based volunteers in general make our organizations more sustainable. They can become part of our human capital plan, and that means that whenever the economy takes a downturn, whenever our staff perhaps have, they're out sick, they go on leave, there are different things that happen, volunteers can be there to be supporting an organization when sometimes employees can't. We always look at that as the opposite way, that employees are the solid and stable piece. But if you really look at it, volunteers can be that way too, especially if they're embedded in some of your core functions and feel like they have a part of your organization. Again, that we've seen a lot of research over the years about how having skills-based volunteers involved helps extend your mission. It helps extend your budget as well. So there's been studies we're looking at organizations that use skills-based volunteers against those that don't deliver so much more on their mission for the same budget. It's because they're complementing their staff with additional professional expertise. So you're able to do a lot more. Again, I want to just jump down to the bottom part where these organic relationships with skills-based volunteers leads to stronger relationships with companies that drive even more resources towards your organization. So that's a really big point of skills-based volunteers, and it's important that nonprofits are leveraging that. All right. Couple things for how you might get started using a skills-based volunteer. Definitely want a project description. So notice how we're talking about a project here versus a position description, because it's pretty easy for people to commit to, say, a month working on something versus just an open-ended something, or this is going to be reoccurring every week. That can be hard, especially for people who are in the early stages of their career. They have kids. It might be really hard to commit to, I don't know if I can come twice a month for, I don't know, any extended amount of time. But if you tell me we need to meet 5 times over the next month to accomplish this project and we're going to be done, that's a lot easier for someone to commit to in that stage of life. We also want to identify the metrics and define a successful project. So again, that's with any project that you would be doing internally. Let's think of the way these volunteers would be involved with something, the way staff would be involved with something. So you really set it up in that way, not treating volunteers so differently than your internal staff. We want to have a skill set that we're specifically looking for. That's easier to match then. And then we want to make sure, of course, that we have, going back to our original volunteer management list, we want to make sure we have the resources and staff assigned to this. A couple resources to help you source the actual skills-based volunteer. We have Taproot and Catchafire. Those are both online places where you can upload a project that you need into a database, and skills-based volunteers who want to work virtually go through it and they can select, hey, I want to work on this, and then they're connected with your organization. So definitely there are more of these popping up all the time. Take a look at those. If you're developing a project description anyways, why not put it up there and see what you get? 1OC, one of our services is that we do connect skills-based volunteers, board members, committee, council, all of those. So if you have a need, please talk with us about it as well. And then you want to also look at your current volunteers and board members. Let them know that this is a need. This is a project you want to do. Does anyone have any connections to this skill set? Many of our volunteers, again, that are coming in just as hands-on volunteers have professional skills that we're not utilizing. And that's part of the retention thing, is getting to know those people that are already a part of your organization and what other ways could they be involved that are actually things they're super passionate about but could be really helpful to your organization as far as core business functions. All right, I think we're ending at 10:50, so we'll stop here. Like I said, we skipped over a couple slides. We will send these out. You guys can get the slides. We're here as a resource for everyone. Does anyone have any quick questions? I know we only have like two minutes, but yeah.
Well, you know, it's interesting about the skill set, and I do think I've just recently become the community house director, and just asking for a volunteer, they're like, well, what am I going to be doing? You know, it's like, so I have actually started going, well, I need somebody who's good at this, and this is what the job is. So it's kind of like I'm starting down that road, and I think I can actually take what you've shown me today and get it out to my members and say, okay, these are my things that I need. I only need it for 3 weeks or until it's up and running, and then move on.
Yeah.
So, very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that you took that. Yeah.
I missed ESG.
ESG, Environmental Sustainable Government. So it's specifically companies who are focused on those pieces and on getting involved in that area. So it's not every company. Some companies have both CSR and ESG. ESG is almost like the second step, like the rung above CSR. But a lot of companies now have CSR focuses, and they really want to do a lot around that. Yeah.
This is probably the case with many people in this room. Our entire organization is a volunteer organization. We
Yeah.
have no paid staff.
Okay.
sorry, I didn't hear you.
Our entire organization is a volunteer organization. We have no paid staff.
Right.
So part of the other piece of volunteer acquisition is to get board members.
Yes.
Do these same criteria apply?
I absolutely think so, because whenever you're looking at your board makeup, you look at things like, I hope, most people are looking at demographics at this point. They're looking at how many women do we have represented on this board? Are we represented in all different areas? What you also want to look at is, are we represented from all different industries? So I think whenever you start out on your board search, you also want to say, hey, we happen to have a lot of people that are in healthcare industries, that are in this one, and you're identifying then, we need some more people in finance. Who's going to sit on our business and finance committee? Who's going to support it this way? And so I think identifying specific skill sets is actually a really great way to go into board recruitment. Yeah.
So just as a comment, thank you for this presentation, it was very helpful. We also are an all-volunteer organization. We do not have anybody that derives any type of compensation or salary from the work that we do. So my philosophy has always been, whatever you're doing, whatever project you're involved with, make it fun. Because if it's work, if it's drudgery, you might get someone to do it once, you might get someone to do it twice, they won't be back a third time. So it's really important to make it fun and absolutely define what your goal is. Your project is going to be raising money, and this is where the money is going to be distributed. These are the different places where it's going, or whatever your goal is. Doing rehabilitation to get, let's say, disabled people to function in society. Define your goals, make sure your volunteers are crystal clear on what the ultimate goals are, so at least they know that what they're doing has a purpose.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I would just leave with, a lot of times when we want volunteers so much, we're willing to have volunteers come in and we ask them, what do you want to do? What would be so helpful? Like, what are you interested in? What is this? We want to ask about their interests and skill sets, but we need their role to align with our mission. We cannot just be creating volunteer roles that don't align with any of our goals. Otherwise, you as staff and volunteer managers are going to get very frustrated with managing someone that's not even helping you get to your goals. So be very clear about that. You need to have specific positions, and it's great to match them, and it's great to figure out where they belong with their skills and interests, but their interests shouldn't dictate the volunteer roles that you're offering. So I'll leave it with that, and thank you guys so much. Oh, yes, Ellen.
Yes, one last question. If the organizations want to work with 1OC to be that connector to those businesses that do have skills-based volunteers, what is the next step?
Yes, please reach out to us. We are going to email everyone that attended today. So you'll get an email from myself and Alyssa. Please let us know if you're interested in talking more, brainstorming. We're happy to help. Awesome. Thank you all. Thank you.